However, the science of ethics developed from philosophy to imagine what would be a positive outcome. That is the point of ethics. The authors of the article's assertion that infanticide was either morally neutral or a positive outcome never takes into account the consent of the child that application of coercive fatal force is going to be applied to. They sidestep the issue by saying that the child has only potential to be human and only potential to make choices. They do not have right to consent or right to life, because the child's capabilities, physical or psychological, are not able to assert that right. And that's the material concept of human beings being put into Dr. Francesca Minerva's and Dr. Albani's article, which I'll explain on. Okay. Empirically speaking, a child in the womb or out of the womb just after the process of birth is helpless, and thus that is why the law was created by human society, to protect the weak, and that is the point of it. Even if that weakness is temporary or permanent or for whatever reason, we could be, you could walk across the road and be hit by a car. I mean, are you expecting when you're taken to hospital for someone to decide whether you should die because you're incapacitated with a broken leg? I mean, they might be doing that in Syria, right, for political reasons, but the article is saying because your capabilities and your just material are diminished, you have less right to a choice about yourself and less right to protection under the law. So the law protects human beings not because of their role in society, but as individual members of human society, whose commonality is their humanity. That is why the law in process is impartial and upholds what is a reasonable positive outcome for individuals and for society. They are all equal under the law. That rights asserted can be suspended if a crime, suspended in their assertion, as defined in the legal section of this letter. This video. Has been committed, a crime if a crime has been committed, but that right was there before, during and after death, as it was given by nature, reason, evolution, God, for instance. That is why, as I said in some of my other videos, whether you believe in God or not, and personally I'm agnostic on the subject, it's important that evolution in the counter argument, both those ideas are important, because if there is a conception of God who owns a land, for instance, then no one has the right to take that land off of you. And if whether he exists or not, it's all subject to reason. Yeah, as the Stoics said, God and reason are the same thing in terms of what they called the whole thing as the universe, as being the logos, right? So I don't want to get off into religion here, but there is sort of or philosophy, but there is sort of ethical underpinnings which we've gone on from there, which have underpinned the arguments. So those rights were given by nature, reason, evolution, God. A totality, so it's a totality concept which human beings have no power to corrupt or turn into a tyranny. Some human beings. The authors of the article try to get around this by using a trait of thinking from economics via the material dialect. A dialect is attention, and material is, the physical things. so they try and get around it, around this idea of humanity via use of a trait of thinking from economics via the material dialect argument that human beings are only dull material to be used as such, and that it is their capabilities and potential for use by power that is their only reason for being, in order to be manipulated. This is both a trait in parasitical capitalism and Marxism, which wanted the highest level of parasitical capitalism. So you can see how it goes around in a kind of circle in their thinking. Parasitical capitalism and Marxism, which wanted the highest level of parasitical capitalism, with a psychologically coercive approach to change terms, words, verbs, meanings to be by changing the associations meanings that are attached to those tools of discussion, thus making rational discussions impossible, and thereby any resistance to such a totalitarian suicidal mean hard or next to impossible from within the area dominated physically by the followers of that totalitarian mean. However, reason and free will mean we can choose not to believe or invest in irrational ideologies or totalitarian memes. This allowed the meme of Western rationalism and Western civilization as a confederacy of nations to resist totalitarian traits within its own civilization and existential totalitarian entities, whether they be non-state actors like the Saudi and Bin Laden crime families and their private army, Al Qaeda and the Taliban and the ISI, or the Soviet Union, or those dictatorships within Western civilization that have occurred over the many thousands of years. So the ethical questions about abortion, infanticide, the legality of self-defense, and what is considered a illegal killing by the term murder is developed only if more than one opinion is considered. However, if that opinion is not based on empirical, moral and ethically sound rational principles that develop the best outcome for all human beings who have not committed a crime, if that opinion is if that opinion, however, is a deceitful design which causes harm to individual human beings and human society, it must be resisted, and laws designed to prohibit and constrain the actions that follow from its irrational projections. So here we must decide if the authors of the article "Why Should the Baby Live?" Dr. Minerva and Dr. Alberto are asserting empirically a positive outcome that we can consider a norm in society, that everyone in society could agree to as a legal, moral, rational action. Even if we would decide to or decide not to consent to it as policy, because they said in their article to the paper it's not policy, but obviously they hint by using the title as a rhetorical question and a normative question by saying why should the baby live, that they're obviously driving that they would like it to be either seen as positive from what they're trying to say, or they want it to be policy because they wouldn't have written the article otherwise in the way that they've written it.